Hey, what's going on guys? Ryan Nelson here, and today we're comparing the Canon R versus the new Canon R6. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. If you want to follow along on your computer screen, go ahead. There's a link down below in the description to download some of these sample photos and video clips if you want to compare them side by side, not in a YouTube compression format. Sometimes it does make a difference. So, link down below if you want to go ahead and download those. If you want to check out the R or the R6, I've dropped B&H links down below in the description. If you want to support me, click those links and buy something from B&H. That's a cheap and free way, honestly, for you to support me in this channel, and I can keep doing these awesome videos. Please do that. I would appreciate it. Okay, so let's get into this comparison. If you're comparing these two cameras, one of the big differences is the megapixel count. The R has 32 roughly, as to where the Canon R6 has roughly 20. So why does the new camera have a lot less than the older camera? Beats me. So I wanted to see in video and photo how these stack up. So here we're looking at an example of both cameras in studio, full studio strobe setup. Now there is a very minute difference here. Obviously it's a lot more megapixels. You're not gonna notice until you're zooming in a lot on these photos. So if you're doing big prints, if you're doing a lot of fine detail Photoshop work, that's where you're really gonna notice this lack of megapixels. But then when you switch over to video mode, I really didn't feel like I lost anything with this lack of megapixels. If anything, you might gain a little bit better low light capabilities with this camera. So the new Canon R6 does have a full frame 4K recording. To be totally honest with you, I actually like the crop on the R. I feel like I get a little bit more out of my lenses. There are very few situations where I would actually prefer to have a full frame. I'm gonna say about 95% of the time, I'm totally fine with the crop sensor on the R versus the full frame on the R6. But there are those, very few scenarios where I'm like, I really want to go super wide. I need a little bit more width. And in that case, it would be nice to have that full frame sensor. It's not gonna be a reason for me to upgrade at this point. Maybe it is for you, it's not for me. Now, one major feature of the R6, and I'm sure you're aware of this, the in-body image stabilization. Works for photo mode and video mode. The R only has a digital stabilizer, which only works in video mode. Granted, I do like it. I think it works fairly well, but the R6 has a digital stabilizer and the physical in-body image stabilizer. How does that translate into photos? So I took both of these cameras out and did a comparison on doing handheld half-second shots. Taking a look at these, you can get better shots with the IBIS. That being said, it does take a few shots. If you are still a little unstable with your hands, you can get a lot of shake with the IBIS still, especially at a half a second plus. And then with the R, we're pretty much getting handshake because it's really hard to hold something perfectly still for half a second. But a tripod or a monopod could fix that if you want to spend a little bit less money and get the R and maybe get a nice tripod to take with you. So if you're doing handheld shots in low light, you may want to consider getting the R6, especially if you're doing street event, wedding photography, anything like that. So for video, how well does the IBIS work? I have to say it works pretty well. I did a lot of B-roll shots with it, handheld, shooting 4K 60. That IBIS was really nice to take out just those little micro movements as you're doing kind of a slider type shot, just handheld. Doing a longer shot, walking, I think you still get a wobble, you still get some jiggle with it. It's not gonna solve all your problems. You're still gonna be better off putting this thing on a gimbal. All that stabilization, you pair that with a gimbal, the IBIS, the digital image stabilization, you're gonna get some really buttery smooth shots. I didn't happen to get around to doing that when I had this camera. I do wish I had an example to show you, but my experience putting the R on a gimbal, I get some really nice smooth shots with that. With the addition of an IBIS, I'm sure it's gonna be just even better. So, something to think about. Another big plus for the R6 is you're able to shoot 10-bit internally. Now, if you're doing a lot more portable run and gun, this can allow you to go even smaller, even lighter, versus carrying the R with, say, an Atomos recorder. And I pair my R up with the Ninja 5 a lot. I love it. I love being able to be out and see that bigger screen, get my highlights dialed in right where I want them. It is harder to do on the small screen, but if you do want to have a much more portable setup without an external monitor and still get that quality, the R6 is going to be, pretty good for that. I had no complaints with the internal 10-bit. Now, if you're curious about how the internal 10-bit stacks up against shooting external 10-bit on the R, good news, I have a quick example of that. So taking a look at this example, I do think that the internal recording out of the 6 is maybe 10% better than the external 10-bit recording on the R. Is that enough to upgrade if you have the R? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Pair that with the IBIS or the smaller form factor if you're really running gun setup. Like, maybe that's worth it for you. If you're really wondering about upgrades for yourself, I mean, you gotta say, is this better enough for me to shell out more money, or am I totally fine with what I have? I'm gonna give you my answer at the end. I think you probably know what it is by now. Now, if you're wondering about the 10-bit versus recording 8-bit internal on the R, in my past experience, if you're trying to grade 8-bit internal footage off the R, if you need to push it more than just a couple of points either way, it does start to break down a little bit. I don't have any really good examples of this for this test, but just know that if you're recording 10-bit, you're gonna have a lot more flexibility in post-production. Now, if you're curious about the HDR-PQ in the R6, go ahead and check out this video up here, that one right up there. Go ahead and check that out. I dive a little bit more in depth about HDR-PQ in that video, so check that out. Now, one thing I am just baffled that is not on the R is an interval timer. I mean, come on, Canon, it's on the RP, it's on the R6, it's on the R5. Why did you not put an interval timer on the R? I know I can do time-lapse movie recordings, but let's take a look at the differences here. So this time-lapse is shot on the R with the movie time-lapse, and then this is shot on the interval timer. So basically I'm doing a photo time-lapse. I'm taking a time-lapse with raw photos. That's giving me so much more flexibility in my time-lapse, especially if you're doing a time-lapse, say like this one is from day to night. So if I want to have an extended time-lapse here, I want more detail when it starts to get a little bit too dark, I'm able to get into Lightroom and pull up the shadows ever so slightly on the tail end of this time-lapse. And I can extend that time-lapse and make it look nicer. I can even process 2 separate batches of these photos and kind of overlap them in Premiere, and then that kind of draws out that time-lapse a little bit longer. But just as it goes, I'm not able to pull those shadows out in the movie time-lapse out of the R. You are able to get a much, much better time-lapse if you want to do a photo time-lapse versus just a movie time-lapse. One big plus, if you do a movie time-lapse, that's a lot less back-end work that you have to do. The downside of it is you are losing quite a bit of quality as an overall image, especially if you're doing highlights, shadows, day to night, anything like that. You're probably gonna wanna go with a photo time-lapse and then put more work into the post-production side of it, and you're just gonna end up with a better time-lapse overall. So this one is more just for fun, just to kind of see what I can get out of both of these cameras for astrophotography. I wasn't fully committed to this. I did not get a proper bulb timer for both of these to do nice long exposures. So these are 30-second exposures. So unprocessed out of these cameras, yes, they're both a little bit dark. So in Lightroom, I did give these both the exact same treatment. So as an overall, the R, you can see, is definitely pulling out a lot more color out of the sky, a lot more color out of the Milky Way. The R6 looks just maybe a little bit flatter, a little bit less color going on there. Now, if you really want to spend some time in Lightroom, you can probably pull all this out a little bit more out of the R6. The R seems to be a little bit easier to get a better astro photo. That being said, let's zoom in. Let's take a look at these. Again, I think the R is getting a little bit better detail, a little bit more colors. It's just looking better. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, if you wanna do astrophotography, actually look at the RA, which is built specifically for astrophotography. But if you wanna use it for more than just astrophotography, maybe go ahead and think about getting the R. It's good for astro, it's good for photos, day, night, whatever you want. And the video quality is pretty good too. So that being said, let me go ahead and wrap this up. My thoughts, I know you've been waiting for it. You probably are. What camera do I have? I have the R. Even though I had this R6 in my possession, I ended up actually buying a second R. So that might just go ahead and tell you how much I really love the R6, which is to say not very much. I mean, it does have some really awesome features to it, but it's just not, I don't think it's better enough. It is better. I'm saying it, like, for most things, it's better than the R, but I don't think it's a step up, especially for the price they put on this thing. What would make me buy this if they put in 25 to 30 megapixels? That would be a huge step. I really don't want to like downgrade in megapixels, especially for some of the studio work that I do. The full frame's great, but I do still like the crop on the R. Like I don't mind. Like I really actually prefer it most of the time. I know a lot of people dog the R because, oh, it's got a crop full frame. I don't really care. I like it. It works for me. It suits me. It may not suit you. And just like overall using this camera, I do prefer using the R. Maybe that's because I've used it for a year or so now. I've gotten a little more used to the controls. I like the way it's set up. I like the screen on top, as to where the R just still has the dial. At first I thought I would miss the dial, but now I really don't miss the dial. It's a bigger body, so if you like the small compact shape of the R, it's more the size of like a 5D series. The body is just a little bit bigger again, and I don't know that I prefer that. I may give it up for the R5 when I finally get a chance to test that, just because that's just jam-packed full of features, and I'm really looking forward to testing that one out. Just saying, when the chance comes around, I may not send that one back. I may just make that phone call and be like, yo, sorry guys, I'm not sending this one back. I'm just gonna keep it. But that's neither here nor there. We're talking about the R6 versus the R. I do prefer the R. You may prefer the R6. It's not my call to make for you. It's my call to make for me. Like I said, I chose the R. I've got two now. This one right there and this one right there. I do like having them both. It's really great. So tell you what guys, if you like this video, found it useful, informative, helpful, anything like that, do me a huge favor, hit that thumbs up button down there, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and if you hated this video, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and watch my next video. Just do it. Go ahead and do it. I will see you guys next time.